friends. So this is not a video I was planning to make, to be honest. I have a theme more or less on this channel, and I don't really like to bring things to this platform that set off debates and battles of will, because the actual message always gets lost whenever that happens. However, in the last week or two, I decided that, you know what, I do want to talk about this subject after all, and I'm talking about pride. As you may or may not know, June is Pride Month, and we are going to talk about why it's something that people want and need to celebrate. I'll start out by saying this. I don't really have a coming out story to necessarily share with you. My decision to tell people my truth was about as much of a non-event as you can get. Nobody cared and nobody was surprised. None of my friends or family batted an eyelash. My friends then are still my friends now. So I was very lucky in that regard. As far as knowing I was gay, I have known that since I was pretty young. That doesn't mean that I accepted it then, but I knew. I knew that I was different. And speaking of that, let's be real. Despite all the blah, blah, blah you hear out in the world about how being different is so great, people sometimes don't really want you to be different, especially when it's a different that they don't understand or that's uncomfortable for them. When you're an adult who's different, it's one thing. But when you're a kid, different is generally the last thing you want to be. Different can get you ostracized, different gets you picked on or bullied or much worse. To put it simply, being different can make you afraid to be who you really are. Many, many people who identify as gay grow up just like this. We do not grow up as ourselves. We grow up playing a version of ourselves that puts aside our authentic self and puts in its place a different version, one that will limit our exposure to ridicule or harassment or humiliation. We create this version to protect ourselves when we are younger, and then we spend a lot of our adulthood trying to shed that, trying to figure out who we actually are underneath. If you've never had to do this, friends, consider yourselves lucky. Oh, and yeah, the fear. The fear is still sometimes there, except now, instead of wondering if you'll be the only kid not invited to a classmate's birthday party, the questions you ask yourself are far more serious. Like, will my parents disown me if I tell them the truth about my sexuality? Will I lose this job or client if they find out I'm gay? Will I be denied this apartment that I can more than afford to live in because the owner doesn't like that I'm gay? Living in fear, friends, is no way to live, especially over something that you did not choose. And no, it's not a choice. This is a tired old myth. There's tons of research that shows firmly that sexual orientation is caused by biological factors that start before birth. People do not choose or decide who they are attracted to. Therapy, treatment, persuasion won't change a person's sexual orientation, nor can someone turn another person gay. So let's stop thinking that choice is a thing here. It's not. Plus, trust me, if it was a choice, a lot of people might choose differently. The only choice you actually have here is whether or not you want to live the life that you know will make you happy versus the life that others expect or may want you to live. That's why fear remains so prevalent. That's why many still hide in the shadows, which, listen, not only is hiding a lot of work, it's very stressful too. Imagine being the only dancer in a musical that runs 24/7, 365 days a year with no curtain call, no break, no reprieve. It would be exhausting. Pretending to be someone that you are not is really not much different. I do want to say two very specific things here before we continue with this video. One, it is important to acknowledge that the world has come a long way in the last, say, 10 to 20 years. Things that I didn't think I'd ever see in my lifetime have come to pass. Views have evolved, and the younger generations, I have found, are much more kind towards and accepting of people who are different than themselves than the generations were before them. So for that, a round of applause for our millennial friends and our Gen Z friends. Please accept this bow of gratitude from me, a Gen Xer. And two, Another round of well-deserved applause goes to our allies and the people who stand up for equality for everyone. I am really, really proud to say that I know so many people who show up for our community, who march in pride parades along with us, who wear their free dad or free mom hugs shirts, who stand up against homophobic behavior even when we aren't in the room to hear or see it. If that's you and nobody has told you how incredibly important and appreciated you are lately, allow me to remind you right now. Thank you. So, getting back to fear. Let's face it, it can be a difficult skin to shed. This is true on more than one side, actually. I'll explain. Yes, there are still a lot of people who are afraid to be who they really are, despite all of this progress that we have made. But there are also a lot of people who fear what they think they don't understand. And unfortunately, instead of using compassion or some other positive emotion, they strike out against it in the worst possible ways. They hurt people, sometimes with actions, sometimes with words, sometimes with both. They destroy things to try to instill that fear deeper and drive people back into the shadows. I wish that I didn't have to say this, but as much as the last few years have brought us so much progress, it's also brought out the absolute worst in some. And the thing about all of this is that there's nothing to understand or not understand about someone else's sexuality. It's not anyone's business but that person's. Someone else's relationship or marriage has no bearing on yours. It doesn't affect your life in any way. And frankly, if you're spending a bunch of time worrying about what someone else's relationships are, then you're probably not spending enough time on your own. And don't you think that's a bigger problem? Just saying. Getting so angry about someone else's sexuality is frankly stupid nonsense. It's also equally stupid to discriminate against that person for the same reason. Yet, that is what happened to gay people for years, and sadly, in some circles it still does. Though it's wonderful to see how much smaller those circles have gotten in the last few years. So, what about the question posed in this video's thumbnail? Why is pride necessary? Here's the answer. As long as people continue to have visceral reactions to others simply out here living an authentic life that has nothing to do with them, pride will be necessary. As long as people get expelled from families, communities, churches, schools, and any other spaces because of their sexual orientation, pride will be necessary. As long as people want to strip away fundamental rights from their fellow human beings because they are different than they are, pride will be necessary. Oh, and P.S., letting other people have the same rights as that you have does not in any way mean that you get less. Equal rights are not pie or cake. Just saying. As long as people feel like they are defined by someone else's standards of less than or a second-class citizen, that they need to hide themselves, pride will be necessary. As long as people get so triggered by who knows what and goes into a crowded nightclub that is a known gay space to shoot and kill strangers, pride will be necessary. As long as people in positions of political influence make decisions with only their own rights in mind and not those of all the people which they are supposed to represent, pride will be necessary. I'm looking at you, Supreme Court Justice Thomas, who voted against marriage equality even though his own marriage was illegal to 1967. Just saying. As long as gay people continue to be targeted for hate crimes, disrespected, or discriminated against, pride will be necessary. As long as people feel alone and that they have no one to turn to and that they would be better off dead than gay, pride will be necessary. As long as people feel like there is something wrong with them or that they should be ashamed of themselves because of who they love or who they are, pride will be necessary. I could go on, but I think the point I'm trying to make is clear. Living an authentic life free from being in hiding is always worth celebrating. Gay people just happen to do that during the month of June. June wasn't picked arbitrarily. It's to commemorate the uprising at the Stonewall Inn in New York City's Greenwich Village on June 28, 1969. On that day, people fought back against a police raid that took place there for no other reason than the fact that it was a known place where gay people congregated. It wasn't the first time those raids happened at least once a month or more, but this time people had enough, and rightfully so. They refused to just sit and take this blatant abuse of power and trampling of their rights as human beings. That was considered to be the start of the gay rights movement in the United States and actually around the world. That's where Pride began. And for those people who ask, why isn't there a heterosexual Pride Month? As if they're saying something funny or even new. Here's your answer. Pride isn't really about celebrating being gay. It's about celebrating being allowed to have the same rights as others, including the right to just exist. So instead of asking a boneheaded question like that, wondering why there's not a straight pride, be thankful that you don't need one. Friends, speaking your truth, owning your story, and loving yourself through that process is one of the bravest things we will ever do as people. Let's encourage each other to do that instead of judge. Let's stop focusing on the things that divide us and instead on the things that include everyone and respects their rights. At the end of the day, our similarities are greater than our differences anyway. That's all I've got for you this time. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next week with a new priority message. Take care.